President Obama last night around 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time addressing the nation, letting the Americans know that U.S. forces had killed Osama bin Laden. That is our topic this morning. We're getting your thoughts on that, your opinion, your comments for all of today's Washington Journal. And we're joined right now here at the table by Michael Scheuer. He is the former CIA bin Laden Unit chief from 1996, inverted those numbers, 1996 to 1999, and then served as an advisor to that unit from after the 2011 September 11th attacks to 2004. Let me just begin first with your reaction when you heard the news.
Oh, I was delighted. He was a man who needed to be dead. He was a direct threat to the United States, a very worthy enemy, they would have said in the 19th century. Here was a man who defied the United States for 16 years, hurt us, and still lived to talk about it. So taking him out was very important. It's not sufficient to win the war, but it's a good step.
What should Americans be watching for? What do you think the CIA is going to be watching for from al-Qaeda going forward?
Well, we're looking certainly at the agency will be looking at their immediate reaction wherever we can find it. There's been some public statements already pledging revenge. And we also faced the problem at 9/11, al-Qaeda's only platform was in Afghanistan and Pakistan. They now have very good organizations in Yemen, in Somalia, in Iraq, in the Levant, and in North Africa. So this is a much bigger problem than it was at 9/11, so they'll be looking at those things. The other thing that everyone will look for is individual Muslims who are angered by this action and who will try to take revenge against American tourists or businessmen or expatriates or the same sorts of individuals from our allies.
What are your concerns?
My concern is mostly that Americans don't get the idea that this is over. I think the president was very strong on that last night, and it's important. I don't mean at all to degrade what we succeeded in doing yesterday, but this is more than a one-man problem. And although the president, Mr. Bush, always say that we are not at war with Islam, there is a significant part of the Islamic world that is at war with us. And that will continue and probably be reinvigorated by the death of Osama bin Laden.
Who could replace Osama bin Laden?
I think initially you'll see the Egyptian, his deputy, Ayman al-Zawahiri, replace him. I don't think Zawahiri will be the permanent commander. He's a very avuncular man, a very abrasive man, and doesn't get along with Yemenis and the Saudis very well. Who might take his place? They've talked about a Libyan named Abu Yahya, who has been very prominent in the religious discussions of al-Qaeda. So he's a candidate. The al-Qaeda commander in the Arab Peninsula, a guy named Wabashi, is a very, very senior person, former secretary of Osama bin Laden. So those are two candidates. The one thing we do know is al-Qaeda puts an enormous amount of time into planning succession. And so this is not something they wanted to happen, but it will be something they prepared for a long time.
How do we know that?
Well, bin Laden has said this is going to be a generational war. I'm not going to be around to see the end of it. We have seen them consistently. For example, we've killed number 2s and number 3s all over the world, and they announce that the person died, they announce his successor, and they sometimes try to rub our nose in it by putting his curriculum vitae on the internet. So one of the reasons they have survived, first against the Soviets and now against us, is because they do plan for succession.
What do we know about how he was killed?
Well, it appears he was killed in a firefight. The Navy SEALs, in as I understand it, a CIA-led operation, landed on top of his villa. Gave him a chance to surrender once they cornered him. He refused, and then he was shot and killed. He died, unfortunately, exactly the way he wanted to. He preferred death to capture, and much of the Muslim world will see him as a holy warrior who died in fighting in God's path.
Why the burial at sea?
I think for some reason they thought that if they buried him on land, it would be a shrine or something. And of course, Sunni Muslims, especially Salafis like bin Laden, don't believe in shrines or in memorials. They are in fact, they are very opposed to it. And so I think just to be on the safe side, they buried him at sea.
As we started this, I let our viewers know that you were the former unit chief of the bin Laden unit at the CIA. You
Yes,
started it.
I did.
Why?
At that time, Tony Lake was Mr. Clinton's national security advisor, and he wanted us to go after Lebanese Hezbollah or Osama bin Laden. We couldn't go after Hezbollah because so much of the money they had was in religious institutions, and we didn't want to go after them. The White House didn't want to go after them. But we went after Osama bin Laden because after the war against the Soviets in 1992, when that finally ended, his name began to turn up all over the world. In Mindanao, in Yemen, in Chechnya, in Uzbekistan, in East Africa. Not that he was in command of all of those places, but he had provided money, training, false documents, rhetoric, sermons that were on tape and were used. And so we set up the unit to decide whether or not he was indeed a threat or just another Saudi spendthrift. And it turned out, obviously, that he was a very hands-on military commander.
What type of reaction did you get when you went to your superiors and said, I want to start a whole unit on this guy, and I'm going to name it after him?
Well, the request came down from the White House to either go after bin Laden or al-Qaeda. And when they decided on al-Qaeda, I was directed to form the unit. And the order came from above. And so we set up in late 1995 and had some very extraordinary successes, really. Some of my officers were really extraordinary performers and gave Mr. Clinton 10 different chances to kill him between May of 1998 and May of 1999. And I have kind of lived in fear since then that there would be a biblical justice in the sense that a lot of times when you don't do something when you have the opportunity, it never comes around again.
What goes into a president's decision to make that order, and do you know why President Clinton did not accept that?
Well, President Clinton was, one time we had a chance to kill him, for example, but we would have had to kill along with him some princes from the United Arab Emirates that he was visiting. And the prince's father was about to buy $8 billion worth of F-16s, and so the White House decided it was more important to sell those planes than it was to kill Osama bin Laden, even with a couple of dead princes. On other occasions, they were afraid the agency would be accused of assassination. They were always afraid of the media and the Europeans. The Europeans will think we're cowboys. And it's not only a Democratic problem. Mr. Bush acted the same way in many instances.
Why did it take so long to get to this point?
Well, I think the primary reason is Mr. Rumsfeld's decision to put what he called the light footprint into Afghanistan. Afghanistan is bigger than Texas, and it has the highest mountains on earth. And we have right now 100,000 troops in Afghanistan. 1 in 3 are shooters, so on any given day we have 35,000 combat troops. They're supposed to keep Mr. Karzai in power, build a democracy, rebuild the economy, build a transportation and communications infrastructure from scratch, defeat the Taliban, and eradicate heroin, and in their spare time go after Osama. So it was a lack of human resources.
Let's get to phone calls here. Stephen in College Park, Maryland. What are your thoughts on this morning, Stephen? Go ahead.
Yes, there's only one sensible, just, and deserving fate for his body. What they should have done with his remains is to desecrate it, i.e., basically feed it to wild pigs or spread it in a pig farm lagoon somewhere in North Carolina to show these Muslims to followers what it means to fight us and who is the boss.
All right.
But unfortunately, we're not doing that. It's unfortunate.
Stephen, that's your opinion. Michael Scheuer, what about stoking the fire and the concerns that some have put in the papers today that, as you said, this is what Osama bin Laden wanted?
I think that they did the right thing in burying him at sea or on land. To desecrate the body would have made us feel good, perhaps, or we might have been amused by it, but it would have invoked great anger in the Muslim world, even among Muslims who are not at war with us.
Let's go on to Lancaster, California. Tony, you're next.
Hi, I just have a quick question. I just have a question for those who call questioning the burial at sea. I want to know, where do they think he should have been buried? In the United States? And do they understand the ramifications of him being buried in someone else's country? Thanks.
Michael Scheuer, that was part of the AP reported that there would have been difficulty in finding a country who would have accepted his remains.
Yes, in fact, and they did ask, as I understand it, they asked the Saudis to take him back, and they wouldn't take him back. So I thought it was an unusual decision when I first heard of it to bury him at sea, but more as I think about it, I think it probably was a good idea. Although now we'll have all kinds of people, the conspiracy folks saying, well, they buried him at sea because they didn't want to see the body, and he's really not dead. So,
do you suspect that there'll be pictures coming forward?
I'm afraid they probably will have to release some pictures to satisfy people in the United States. I'm not sure it's a very good idea or necessary. But
why not?
Well, a lot depends on how he looks, in a sense. When a man dies fighting as a mujahideen, if he looks composed and calm in his death, it's a tradition in the Muslim world that he was truly fighting in God's way. If bin Laden is all shot up and messed up, maybe it'd be a good idea to use it because to use the pictures, because he would be seen as perhaps not being fighting in God's way.
And they showed Saddam Hussein's pictures after he was killed.
Yes, it really doesn't advance the game at all, but it kind of, I guess, satisfies a lot of people to see the actual evidence.
Let's go next to Mississippi. Janie, morning.
Good morning. Am I on?
You're on the air.
Okay. Greta, first I want to say that you're doing a great job. To the lady who called and dressed you down this morning, I do not agree with her at all. I thank God for C-SPAN. I'm an avid viewer of C-SPAN, and if I'm afraid I'm oversleep, I set my recorder. Anyway, I have been up all night, have not slept a wink. I've been rejoicing with the crowds in the street. I am glad he's gone. He can no longer be a threat to us. I believe the chapter has been closed, but I don't think the story is over because I believe there probably will be retaliation from his people. But I just want to commend the special forces and our president for a job well done.
All right. We heard a little bit from phone calls this morning. We talked to Senator Joseph Lieberman, chairman of the Homeland Security Committee. We also talked to former CIA Director General Hayden about the special ops team that went in. Can you talk a little bit about that a little bit more?
Well, apparently there were 40 special operations officers from the Navy SEALs who went in and actually landed on top of the building and cornered Osama bin Laden and several other people, apparently one of his adult sons also. And no one wanted to surrender, so they all ended up dead. It strikes me, given the time in which it took to develop this operation, that the SEALs probably were very well practiced on this. And it did appear to go off like clockwork, a very admirable operation.
What do you make of one newspaper had it this morning that Leon Panetta and others watched this in real time from the CIA?
That wouldn't be surprising. Given the state of optical cameras and other things, you can, we watch things live on the ground in Afghanistan from the Predator, so it's not at all that
So it's
difficult.
a frequent practice?
It is, at least for the Predator, it's very frequent. Yes, ma'am.
Let's go next to Philadelphia. Eric.
Yes. Hi, how are you?
Doing well, sir. You're on the air.
Okay. I just wanted to add and say that I think it's very strange that they haven't showed the body. I also think that it's kind of a thing to get reelected because I don't see how all of a sudden, this happens when people want to see the birth certificate. It's like a smokescreen, if you ask me.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about Osama bin Laden. Who was he?
He was one of the 54 children of a very wealthy Saudi contractor. The Saudi bin Laden company remains the sort of the Bechtel of the Middle East. Bin Laden grew up in Saudi Arabia in a very religious manner. One of the only brothers not to go to school outside of Saudi Arabia. Received all of his education there. Of course, was educated in religion, but also economics and management. He worked for his father's company as first a laborer, then a foreman, and then a construction engineer. He specialized in tunnel construction and the construction of mosques and other buildings. He went to Afghanistan in 1980 to fight against the Soviets and remained there most of the next decade. Then moved to Sudan. stayed there until 1996, and then came back to Afghanistan and had been there ever since.
What do we know about his wealth and who might have access to it going forward?
Well, his own wealth was limited to about $40 million, I think, from his share of the family fortune. He probably still was receiving his annual share of the fortune over the past 16, 18 years. Bin Laden drew money from many sources, from some money from the Taliban, some money from mosque contributions, but a great deal of money from private Saudi and Arab donors, men who he solicited contributions for the Afghan Mujahideen in the 1980s, continued to support him. And there would always be a surge in donations to him after he had attacked the United States. So the funding wasn't always on an even keel, but it was always sufficient.
And he's a prolific fundraiser, is that right?
He was, during the Afghan War, a terrifically prolific fundraiser. And once he began to attack the United States, he began to, that flow of donations began to come back to him again.
What were our efforts and other countries' efforts to freeze his assets?
Well, we did a lot in the United States and in the Western countries in trying to freeze his assets that were in Western banks. But outside of that, we couldn't do very much about it. I think we froze very little of bin Laden's money over time.
Here, a statement was put out by former President George W. Bush. The Washington Post has the quote here. They said, "This momentous achievement marks a victory for America, for people who seek peace around the world, and for all those who lost loved ones on September 11th, 2001. The fight against terror goes on, but tonight America has sent an unmistakable message. No matter how long it takes, justice will be done." Let's go to Clearwater, Florida. Brenda, you're next.
Hi, I'm very happy today. It's a bittersweet day, but it's a good day. And I just have a question. I've lived near McDill Air Force Base all my life, and it's Comp Central. I think that's the way you put it. And how safe is it a target? Would it be a terrorist target?
I think everything in the United States, whether it's a military facility or a civilian facility, probably has to be considered a target. Being in one place rather than another is not much of a safety measure. I don't think they'll be going up against hard targets anytime soon, like a U.S. military base. They'd be much more likely to go after a softer target, a civilian facility, or perhaps assassinating someone.
We'll go to Elkhart, Indiana. Joe, you're next.
Yeah, I have a question for Michael. I'm not sure, this is how I see it, when I see people celebrating in the streets, like in Washington and New York and Boston, it almost reminds me of when the terrorists in these countries that hate us are out in the streets burning our flags and dragging our people down the street and the road. I mean, maybe I'm looking at it different, but I think that maybe this is fueling fires for future terrorism. And I don't know, maybe I'm looking at this wrong, but...
No, sir, I think you're probably exactly correct. I think it's a natural reaction to be out in the street and cheering, but I think it will be interpreted by the enemy as unnecessary. But at the end of the day, that's just the way it is. I don't think we should have tried to prevent people from celebrating. What I fear more than the celebration itself is the American people thinking that killing bin Laden ends it all. And we have a long, hard, high road to climb before this one's over.
A crowd gathered outside the White House last night upon hearing the news from the president that Osama bin Laden had been killed. We'll go next to Seattle, Washington. Ann, morning.
Hi. I think a former CIA operative was just killed, Osama bin Laden. I think 9/11 was an inside job like a lot of Americans do. Look at the 9/11 timeline. It's online if you want to look at that. And that's what I think. I think Obama is the tool of the oligarchs, just like Bush was.
Okay, Ann, that's your opinion. We've gotten a couple phone calls about that this morning. Michael Scheuer, it's not the first time that you've heard that as well.
No, it's nonsense. Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda attacked us on 9/11 primarily because we had failed to kill him in 1998, 1999. The idea that the CIA and the U.S. government would attack their own people is a ludicrous idea, although it's held very closely by, or very tightly by, a number of people.
Nashville, Tennessee. Patricia.
Hello. First of all, I want to just say thank you. My father is a lieutenant colonel in the military, and I have the most top respect for anybody who serves for our country. Thank you for the freedom that everybody has given us. Thank you for our flag still being there, and God bless everybody. To hold our heads high, to be proud, and to give thanks to all the men and women. No matter if you're walking down the street, you see somebody in a uniform, you see a sticker, beep your horn, shake their hands, say thank you, because without them, we would not be in this country and be able to have what we have and be able to voice our opinions as we are this morning. God bless us all, and thank every single one, but keep our guards up, and we'll always be free and safe.
Michael Scheuer.
I think that's a very good sentiment. The politicians are politicians. The young men and women who serve us on the ground in Afghanistan and in Iraq, along with their brothers and sisters in the intelligence services, really deserve our thanks today. They're understaffed, they're under-resourced, and they have done remarkable work.
Reaction out of Saudi Arabia this morning from the AP wires. The country says it hopes the killing of the militant leader and former Saudi citizen Osama bin Laden will boost efforts to fight terrorism. Speak to the relationship that Osama bin Laden had with Saudi Arabia.
Well, he was the deadly enemy of the Al Sauds, of the royal family in Saudi Arabia. But as in most things in Saudi Arabia, things are opaque. There were members of the royal family, there were members of bin Laden's family that still supported him. But he was at daggers drawn with the Saudis, had attacked a couple times in the kingdom. The Saudis had cracked down on his organization. But I think the Saudis probably should be prepared for violence in their country as a result of Osama bin Laden being killed, because his followers will want to take revenge not only against the Al Sauds, but against U.S. and foreign presence on the Arabian Peninsula.
Is that tied to, or is it separate from the protests that we're seeing a little bit in these countries in the Middle East?
Well, it'll be separate in Saudi Arabia. I think most of the protests you're seeing in the Middle East are local at the moment, are directed against Mubarak or Ben Ali in Tunisia. But in Saudi Arabia, the government is not liked very much, and it's regarded as un-Islamic. And certainly one of the things that makes them un-Islamic in the eyes of many of their own people is their animosity toward Osama bin Laden, who is viewed in much of Saudi Arabia as a hero.
What impact do you think this could have, if any at all, on the protests or on the situation in Libya?
Well, I think in Libya, we're providing air support for people who fought alongside of Osama bin Laden against the Soviets. So that's really a mixed-up situation. In Egypt, we see increasingly the Islamists have a great desire to gain power there. Bin Laden's death will be ridiculed, or not ridiculed, will be applauded by many to satisfy the West, but secretly, or at least quietly, people will regret his passing. He was the only Arab leader who has stood up to the United States and actually hurt us.
This is the news out of the Middle East. NATO defends missile strikes in Libya. It says Libyans then attack embassies after deaths reported. That's Baltimore Sun this morning. And then you have this also from the Baltimore Sun in their World Briefing section. Yemeni leader refuses to sign deal to step aside. You have Iran's president denies rift and resumes schedule. And then you also have Syria carries out mass arrests to block protests. Let's go next to Needham, Massachusetts. Donald, you're on the air.
Saying that the right-wing extremists who are still fighting the Civil War will not give credit to President Obama. After all, he's a black man.
I think, sir, that's a little bit of nonsense. President Obama certainly deserves credit for capturing or for killing Osama bin Laden, but he is also the person who tried to tear down Guantanamo, who ended the CIA's rendition program, both of which now obviously has provided very valuable intelligence that helped to facilitate bin Laden's killing. So I don't think it has anything to do with Osama or Obama being black. There's legitimate criticisms for the president's conduct of foreign affairs, just as there was for President Bush.
What about the role of Pakistan in this? What are your questions?
I don't have any questions in the sense the Pakistanis have interests that are very different than ours. And the best thing about killing Osama bin Laden is for a long time we've depended on others to do our dirty work, whether it was Yemenis or Pakistanis. The Pakistanis were never going to do it. So the fact that we stepped up and did it is a very, very good sign for the American people. If we're going to win this war against those parts of the Muslim world that are at war with us, we're going to have to do it ourselves. There's not going to be a proxy who steps in and does it.
What do you think this means for intelligence coming out of both Pakistan and Afghanistan?
Well, I think we will continue to collect intelligence. I think it will be very difficult for the Pakistani government to continue to operate as closely with us as they have in the past. Again, their interests are very different than ours, and they're also fighting a civil war in their own country, which was based, which emanated primarily from their support for our effort in Afghanistan.
Let's go next to Quincy, Illinois. Kim, you're up.
Hi. I just have a response to the question. Well, they brought up the subject about Osama's people not being quite happy with the way that he was buried at sea. They wanted something more respectful, I guess, for him. I was thinking about all the beheadings that they offered our people and our American citizens and all over the world, and I don't see much dignity in that. I think that's pretty equal, you know. And
Okay, Michael Scheuer.
Yeah, we live in a pretty politically correct world. The U.S. government wanted to treat him according to Islamic law or custom by burying him within 24 hours, and they decided to do it at sea. Again, it won't be appreciated much in the Islamic world, but I don't think it really matters. We're at war after all, and at times you have to offend people if you're going to fight a war.
We'll go to Fort Washington, Maryland. Gloria.
Good morning.
Morning.
And thank you very much for your program. I just wanted to say it's always a tragedy of monumental proportions when there are no good ways to come to a needed end. And the taking of a life is always a bittersweet. I happen to be a minister, so taking of a life is always a bittersweet solution, no matter whose life that is. But that said, I have nothing but praise and admiration for the brave men and women who collaborated to bring this to as good an end as possible, who went right into the middle of a neighborhood with no hurt or harm and just did the job they needed to do. As far as bringing him back here to trial, I think we're going to be in enough danger because he's been removed. We'd be in danger, removed or not, so people needn't whine about that. That was inescapable. But the distraction of having him, the distraction and expense of going into a long, you're really going to try him for just the 3,000 people that he killed at Ground Zero? That would be ridiculous. And as for burying him at sea, I don't think there was any disrespect meant. I think it was a very wise decision, and it will result in the fact that it will forever prevent them from memorializing maniacal murder.
All right, Kim, we'll leave it there. There was some commentary in the papers today about U.S. officials not wanting a trial, that they were relieved in many ways that he was killed and not captured alive.
I think absolutely the case. I hope we learned the lesson from Saddam. We should have thrown the grenades into the hole with Saddam and avoided a trial. Certainly, we didn't want Osama bin Laden in the Southern District of New York for 3 years, speaking on CNN and Al Jazeera to the Muslim world. That would just have been a nonsense. So I think they ought to be relieved, and they did give him a chance to surrender. He didn't. He much preferred death to capture.
Where did you learn that detail, that they gave him a chance to surrender?
It was I heard it on the media this morning, that they I asked him to identify himself. Somebody else identified him, asked him to surrender. He was going to resist, and they shot him.
We've also heard that he did resist, and
Yes.
do we know how he resisted? Did
I
he
don't know
fire?
That. I don't know. He always had an AK-47 with him, or AK-74 maybe, and may have fired back. No Americans were hurt, so he may have been killed in the act of preparing to shoot.
Jack Hutton tweets in this quote: President chaired no fewer than 5 National Security Council meetings on the pursuit of bin Laden. What do you make of that?
Well, that's the way the U.S. government works. Meetings are endless. They were really, I think they were rightfully worried about putting U.S. Servicemen and CIA people into Abbottabad without any means of rescuing them if things went terribly wrong. And so I think in this case, probably meetings were a good thing.
Let me go back to...
It's surprising it didn't leak. That's what was very interesting, is there was enough discipline in the government to have 5 meetings without a leak, which is extraordinary.
And describe how these sort of meetings come together. I mean, the president is chairing this.
Yes. Generally, it's some of his cabinet members and the head of his intelligence community, the Secretary of Defense, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the FBI, Department of Justice. Very senior people.
I want to go back to this idea of having a trial, because maybe you can speak to this. The American Hero tweets in this: how do you try someone for being a mastermind?
Well, I guess he is responsible for ordering the 9/11 attacks, and there must be some law that covers that. I'm not sure this is a law and order issue. I think this is a military issue, and the further we can get away from trials, the better off we are.
All right. We'll go to McLeod, Kansas. Matt, you're next.
Good morning. Thank you, C-SPAN. I wanted to speak specifically to Mr. Scheuer. I've followed some of your programs here on C-SPAN and heard you speak, and I appreciate the opportunity to hear from someone who has had as close a relationship with this particular situation as you have. And so I know that in the past you've expressed some frustration over the years towards the different administrations for their inability to act decisively at times when we had information and the possibility to eliminate Osama bin Laden as a threat. Those opportunities were not, for whatever variety of reasons, taken advantage of. And so now, having heard the news this morning about that action has been taken, I'm wondering if you are encouraged by the actions taken by the Obama administration, and whether or not you think that this approach of having a very thorough intelligence, along with a very decisive and special forces approach to addressing this problem through a combination of intelligence and special forces is something that encourages you?
It doesn't really. I think I'm glad the president took advantage of this opportunity, but we've been at the process of trying to kill them one at a time or capture them one at a time since June or July 1995. There are now way more insurgent fighters, Al-Qaeda and its allies in the field than there were in 1995. This is not a process we can win by killing people or capturing them one at a time. We have to probably apply the military force more severely where we can. We certainly have to go to the heart of their motivation, which is not how we live or what we think or how we raise our children, but rather what our government does in the Muslim world. Our foreign policy is the main recruiter for Al-Qaeda, and that foreign policy remains what it was in 1995, so there's no difference. I'm very glad they took the opportunity to do this. I hope they do it every time they have the opportunity, but in itself, going after one person at a time will only lose this war for America.
What about your criticism of doing this one at a time? Why is that? Are we outmanned?
They are much bigger than we give them credit for. The president last night said bin Laden wasn't a Muslim leader. He was just a thug and a gangster and a mass murderer. Well, there's two sides to every coin. He's very well respected in the Muslim world as a good Muslim, as someone who stands up to defend his faith and his brethren. And although the president, none of our presidents have been willing to admit that, it's very true. And the number of people, if you just look around the world, Al-Qaeda's main base in 9/11 was in Afghanistan. Now they have part of Afghanistan, a big slice of Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Iraq, parts of Gaza, and North Africa. There are an enormous number of people out there besides Al-Qaeda who are also attacking us. So it just doesn't make sense, sense-wise, to think you can take out that many people one at a time.
What are their resources? Many have, specialists have said they have better communications technology than we do.
Well, they have better and different. They beat us sometimes with equipment that was current in the Korean War, which we don't currently collect against, for example. They use walkie-talkies that our National Security Agency doesn't really collect against anymore. Or they buy off-the-shelf, very sophisticated encrypted equipment in Europe or in the United States and ship it back to the war zone. So these men aren't, they're anti-Western, they're not anti-modern. They are extraordinarily interested in the tools of modernity, whether it's weapons or communications or electronics. They're very anti-Western in terms of democracy, women's rights, and things like that.
St. John's, Arizona. Walter, you're next.
Good morning. I had a question and a comment there. Now, I used to be a tenant at the World Trade Center back in the late 70s. So when the towers went down and I heard the name bin Laden on the first day, I started doing an internet search to find out who he was. I came across the congressional expense record back during the Afghanistan war with Russia, and I noticed that the CIA was paying bin Laden between $26 to $30 million a month in providing him with Stinger missiles and so forth. Now, I've never seen an accountability of how much was paid to bin Laden and how much military equipment was provided to him during that time period. Do you believe that full record should be openly disclosed to show how much money was paid to bin Laden by the U.S. government?
There's not a single cent paid to bin Laden by the U.S. government. I happened to work on the Afghan Covert Action Program from 1985 until 1992. Bin Laden wouldn't even meet with us at that time. He certainly got no money nor arms for us. If you were reading a document on the internet that listed any kind of a payment to Osama bin Laden, either in materiel or in money, you were reading a fabrication.
We'll go to Green Bay, Wisconsin. Michael.
Hi. My question was just, I'm kind of concerned with just making sure how the Muslim world is going to view his burial. Is there anything that you're aware of that a burial at sea is against any Muslim tradition?
No, I don't know. I don't know the first thing about that, sir. I know I've never really run into the instance before. But again, you fight a war, you got to offend someone. The president made, I think, a wise decision in what he did, and we'll have to live with the consequences if there are any.
The Associated Press reported this morning, administration officials said they did carry out his burial in Islamic tradition, in that it was a speedy burial.
Yes. The custom is within 24 hours, and they did do that. So I think this is a matter of little moment at the moment, if you will. It's probably would have been better if the Saudis had taken him and buried him at home, but it is what it is, and we'll have to deal with it.
And do you perceive this is something that people get stuck on?
I think it's a detail that probably does not require much more than the talk we've given it to it this morning.
Candace in Jeffersonville, Indiana.
Yes. Hi. I was just wanting to say that I thank our troops. I thank everybody out to help in taking care of this problem and eliminating our enemies.
All right. We'll go on to Clarksville, Tennessee. George, what are your thoughts?
Yes, I would just like to ask Michael if I could. It might sound silly, but does he think there's any chance that the president didn't know that burial was going to happen at sea?
You know what? That's a good question, sir. I think it could well have been that the military decided to do it that way, or the agency in the military decided. On this particular issue, though, Mr. Obama seemed to be very much knee-deep in the details, so it probably was cleared with him. Again, I have to say that it surprised me when it happened, but on reflection, I think it probably wasn't a bad idea for it to happen.
Go next to Endicott, New York. Sean.
Hi.
Morning, Sean.
I just wanted to say a couple things. For one, I wanted to congratulate Obama. I'm not a big supporter of him, but he did accomplish one thing so far that he said he was going to do, and that was get bin Laden. And number two, I think that the United States needs to stop trying to save face by not showing pictures of it and being killed, because if it, they were sitting there hurrahing in the streets and everything. Well, why shouldn't we in D.C.? So that's just what I wanted to say, because I just think that we're always worried about what other people are going to think. This guy committed mass murder. Well, he got what he deserved, and everybody should be in the streets. So.
All right.
Yeah, I think the president, he had the con. He gets the credit. I think that's fair enough. I think they will be forced to put the pictures out because the conspiracy people will say, again, as we said earlier, that he really isn't dead. He's now living with the Trilateral Commission or some other conspiracy-minded organization in the world. So we'll probably see those pictures before long.
FBI website has on their list of most wanted terrorists now has bin Laden as deceased. Next to that, the most wanted terrorists, a list there. Michael Scheuer, if you could just tell us a little bit about who you think are the most wanted terrorists or about them.
Well, I think Mr. Zawahiri, bin Laden's deputy, is probably the next on the list. But the younger generation of al-Qaeda, a man named Abu Yahya al-Libyus especially, who seemed to be being trained to become either bin Laden's successor or Zawahiri's successor. And a man in Yemen who probably is a good contender to succeed bin Laden, a man named Wahbashi, who was very effective, used to be bin Laden's secretary. That's really one concern that hasn't been raised so much, and that's the next generation of al-Qaeda. The next generation is going to be better educated, more computer savvy, and indeed probably more vicious and militant than bin Laden's generation. His son Omar, at the end of his book, said the Americans will be sorry at some point when my father is killed because the successors are much more vicious than he is.
It is a headline in papers across the country this morning, as well as other countries. Here is the headline out of the Cuban newspaper this morning with a picture of Osama bin Laden. Let's go next to Maui, Hawaii. Don.
Yes, I'm finding the burial at sea a bit questionable, and it falls in line. I never did believe that an airplane could knock a building down, much less two airplanes knock down three buildings. What I'm really concerned about, and I'm wondering, Michael, if you can help me, is are you aware to the degree of which our government has been saturated with dual national Israelis and Jewish people? And
we're going to leave it there, Don. I don't know if you want to answer that question.
He didn't get to a question there.
Well, let's talk about the evidence of because it's a phone call we've heard about the government being involved in the September 11th, 2001 attacks. What evidence points to the airplanes going into that building? I mean, it's obvious, but
I think the evidence is I saw it on television. I've seen videotapes of it. I've seen the results of it. Most of the people who say that it couldn't have happened because of the airplanes are engineers or some other kind of people who are experts. Well, you never say never about anything. If you can argue with what you saw on television on the 11th of September, then you should go argue with someone who tends to believe the same thing as you do, because it didn't happen that way.
And what about the intelligence of those people that hijacked the airplanes?
Well, clearly we didn't have enough intelligence at that time, but they were all members of al-Qaeda. After the fact, their last wills and testaments, some of them have been released. There's still more to come. There's really no ground at all to assume that it wasn't al-Qaeda. We knew as early as 1995 that they were thinking about using airliners as bombs, specifically against CIA headquarters at Langley. So I don't think there's any evidence on the side of the conspiracy people, at least that I would accept.
Bishop in Detroit, you're up next.
Yes, I have a couple of comments. Please let me get through, because this guy has had plenty of time to spew the corporate talking points. And the first thing I want to speak on is that I've had personal experience with the system and how they operate. They killed Imam down in Detroit, and then they immediately came on all the news stations lying about him. We knew him personally, and all the things they were saying about him were lies. And then you look in the indictment. It was nothing in the indictment that they were spewing on the TV. Secondly, I don't see the Muslim terrorists with plants or invading other countries or creating not plants, but these bases. We have military bases all over the world. We've invaded countries just like Germany did after they burnt down the Rostock as a false flag operation. We had the 9/11, then we just immediately started invading all these people. And of course, if somebody came, I say this, if they're going to come here and do something, I'm a vet, let them come here. You know, I don't think anybody can come here and do anything.
All right, Bishop, that's your opinion. We'll go to Barry in Savannah, Georgia. Go ahead, Barry.
Yes, I was wondering, why do we allow ourselves to continue in business with these countries that harbor these people? If we know of all the different people and where they're at, we're obviously watching them, but we're not killing them, we're just watching them. Why are we allowing these people to continue hosting them?
Michael, let's take that point.
It's a point that escaped me over the course of my entire career, sir, but that's the way the U.S. government works. We somehow assume that everybody's foreign policy is the same as ours, and so we're very patient with them. But clearly the Pakistanis, their interests are different than ours. The Saudis have different interests than ours. We've just got into the habit of trying to believe that everyone thinks the way we do and wants the things that we want. And unfortunately, that's not the way the world works. And perhaps we need to do some waking up and maybe a little bit of growing up. Because again, if we don't take care of ourselves, there's no one out there that's going to do it for us.
Michael Scheuer, I want to thank you for spending some time with us this morning and answering our phone calls. I think you said at the beginning before we went live that you're working on a book on...
I just finished a book, a biography of Osama bin Laden, as a matter of fact. It was published by Oxford in February.
And so people can get that book. What's the title?
It's just called Osama bin Laden, and it goes through his life, and it tries to explain where the movement was going and where it would go after he was gone.
Well, thank you very much for helping us try to understand this evolving story on the death of Osama bin Laden, killed by U.S. forces. Thank you very much.